Hey, everybody, and welcome to Grassroots Report. Some of you are going to be voting in just a little over a month and a half at the Republican State Convention to decide who is going to be the next chairman of the Georgia Republican Party. And while that position holds most of the authority in our state organization, there are also going to be elections for 5 more officers, and each one of those officers has at least 2 candidates running. There's a 6th officer who's running unopposed. Of course, we'd all like to know what kind of special good luck charm she has. But for those who are not opposed, we're going to be talking with them over the next few weeks. And it's important that we have these long form conversations. Y'all remember that Donald Trump had a huge impact, and his victory was reaching younger voters, particularly young men, through long form podcasting, the Joe Rogan experience being the most famous of them. And so we want to have long conversations and in-depth conversations with the candidates, as many as possible, to give you more information about who's running and why you should consider them. Today, I'm going to be talking with Salleigh Grubbs, who is the former chairwoman of the Cobb GOP and who is running for first vice chair of the Georgia Republican Party. And I'll start out with a humorous question. Salleigh, what's your plan to become chair, to Frank Underwood style or a Veep style, since you'll be the next in line for the job? What's your 4-dimensional chess plan to become chair after you're elected first vice chair?
Oh, Brent, that's hilarious. That is actually a funny question because I am not seeking first vice chair just to be chair at some point in time. I'm seeking first vice chair to make a difference in the state and to help whoever is elected chair. I can assure you.
Yes, the I remember the old joke that people used to say about how people when we wish that Washington was the West Wing. Nice people trying to do their best for the country. That TV show, The West Wing.
Hmm.
We wish that Washington was the West Wing. We are afraid that it's House of Cards with Kevin Spacey as Frank Underwood doing all these sinister, evil things. But in reality, it's Veep.
Right, right, right. Yeah, Brent, I mean, I never got into politics per se to get into politics. You know my story better than most. And it was purely over the 2020 election. I mean, I was a member of the GOP for a long time. In fact, I have pictures of my 27-year-old son on the Independence Day float when he was barely able to walk with a pacifier in his mouth. So I've been around a long time, but not intimately involved until after the 2020 election.
Well, you're not the only one. I think that something like 80% of the delegates this year will be delegates who got involved since the 2020 election. And so they will very much empathize and identify with your situation. And the first vice chair race is one of those races, as all the other officers, really, with the possible exception of treasurer, that most people don't understand. Most people think that it's like running for vice chair of your local party and that you have a lot of authority, you have a lot of influence, but it's different at the state party level. The chairman has so much of the executive control. He sets the budget, hires the staff. So most people don't realize that officers tend to be more of an advisory and support role and can do some things, but they can't do everything. Like when I was second vice chair, I said I would do 3 things that I specifically knew were things that I could do to help local parties that didn't require anybody's permission. I'd help them build websites, social media. So with keeping in mind the limitations of the office, of being able to help, within you can't you can't change everything. That with the parameters of the office in mind, what are some of your goals for this job? I know you've talked about youth engagement. Gen Z is now the youngest Gen Zers are almost teenagers at this point. I think the youngest one turns 13 this year, and the oldest are in their mid 20s. So that's something you've talked about before. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So part of my priorities, Brent, are to engage the grassroots. And that's why I strongly believe in the precinct strategy. I think Dan Schultz had a great footprint for how to engage people. And that's why I also loved what Catherine James did when she brought the United Saves America project and program to the Georgia GOP, which of course Chairman McCoon readily embraced that. We were already meeting about that at the last state convention to get that implemented so that the counties could have a footprint of how to engage people. And that is a program along with Tea Party Patriots has the Secure and Win program to engage people. And all of those programs work. The thing is, you have to work the plan. And so my position on that is engaging the grassroots means actually training people on how to do these things and giving them topics to discuss. The other thing is, which is probably the main prong of the stool for me, is election integrity. As you know, I've worked really hard with our state election board on getting some rules passed. Given the decision that came out by Judge Cox, it kind of knocked the wind out of our sails on that. And that's why those rules were incorporated into House Bill 397, which didn't get to make it across the finish line this legislative session. But those rules are incorporated, and we are hopeful that we'll get that done. And then the other prong of my campaign is financial integrity. And by financial integrity, I mean that the strength of Georgia Republicans truly has to come forward in a financial strength kind of way with raising money to be able to support candidates and to give the grassroots a voice. And I think this is one of the connections that's missing among some people, is they don't understand that the financial strength of the party has to be there in order to help our candidates, help get out the vote, and to do the events that we need to do to get them to the finish line.
Raised an excellent point there. I think a lot of people are under a misconception about the legal authority that the party has. I think that 90% or more of first-time people getting involved think that the Republican Party as an organization has the ability to deny ballot access or primary ballot access ex nihilo to any elected official if we so choose. Because you hear this all the time, the Republican Party, we need to do this. Why aren't they holding this accountable? The problem, of course, is that election law is written by the state legislature, and they write the election law to benefit themselves, as all politicians do.
Right.
I mean, the remote control was invented because people didn't want to have to get up off the sofa and change the channel. And in the same way, the election law is written in such a way that the politicians don't have to get off their sofa, except in rare cases, and run for election. They want to make it as easy for themselves as possible. So I think people misunderstand. And they wouldn't misunderstand if this were, say, the Georgia Freedom Alliance or whatever name you want to call the Tea Party Patriots. I don't think anyone would be under a misconception about that. They would say, oh, of course, we got to raise money to be taken seriously. But I think that folks think we have more power than we do, and that we can just, because we're the official party, expect politicians to jump when we say, and to say how high when we say jump. So as part of fundraising and getting those resources, what else would you say is critical to provide the grassroots with, for lack of a better term, the teeth to, we bark really loud, but if we don't have a good set of jaws, a good set of canines to put a mark on the backside of the politicians or the postman, as the case may be, we're probably not going to get a lot of attention. So what can you do to help the local parties to the extent you're able?
So the fortunate part is that I have a lot of experience with that. We have, as you well know, the 32 counties that make up the over 80,000 caucus represent the majority of voters in the state. And the rural voters always have my heart. And I remember when in 2021, we did a petition to call the legislature into session. And some of the biggest supporters of calling the legislature into session were the legislators from the smaller counties. They saw how the bigger counties could overrule and kind of block out the sunlight for the smaller counties. So I do have a heart for the smaller counties, but being the caucus chair for the over 80,000 counties, I was able to work with the counties that maybe had newer chairmen, needed resources, they needed speakers, and communication was always the key. So to help facilitate communication between the grassroots and the state party, I think is key. But the bottom line is this for me, Brent, is that to have a strong Georgia, we need a strong Republican Party. And I think that's another connection that's missing with some of the candidates is that there's a lot of talk about attacking the GOP and, or that it's the shell of a organization and that kind of thing. But I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And in order for us to have a strong Georgia, it means us electing Republicans for every single seat that we possibly can. The bottom line is Republicans provide stability to our state, to our counties, our municipalities, our local offices are critical to provide strength and continuity and a good economic environment. I mean, that's one of the things even Democrats will say about the current administration is that, we've done great with business. I want to see that business expanded and by legislators who are willing to do those things that need to be done to protect citizens at the same time growing business in Georgia.
In the campaign that you're running, there's a particularly interesting development. You have 3 candidates in your race. Most of the elections have only 2 candidates. There's one has 4, and there's 3 races that have more than 2 candidates, where there could potentially be multiple rounds of voting depending on how things shake out and if they all stay in the race. Yours is one of them. It was a 2 candidate race. Now it's a 3 candidate race. You have 2 opponents, one from Gwinnett County, one from Upson County. How do you differentiate yourself from your opponents? What do you think gives you, as in an elevator pitch, the edge? Why should someone support you over one of your 2 opponents?
Well, I think, I don't look at having competitors so much, Brent, as just the fact that I have a heart for what I'm doing. It's not an easy job. There's been a lot of personal sacrifice. And anybody who runs for a state GOP position has a lot of personal sacrifice. It is the best unpaid position that there is. There is no financial benefit. In fact, we pay to do what we do. But what I think gives me the edge is the fact that I have a lot of grit and determination, and that grit and determination has been exemplified at the state election board and with talking to legislators. And, we have not had an easy time in Cobb County, but we have had some significant victories. We defeated the MSPLOS, the mobility SPLOS that was so incredibly outrageous. I was on the steering committee for that. And we have 2 commission races going on now. We filled every single poll watcher position for all of our precincts for the 2024 election. And I have built coalitions with auxiliary groups like Tea Party Patriots and like Turning Point and Greater Georgia. And, I get along great with all of those people. I love them all very much. To me, it's like one big family. And I think if you treat people with dignity and respect, you're going to get a long way in getting the assistance that you need. So building those coalitions along with the communication with the counties and providing that structure underneath, as you know, previously the over 80 position was just kind of one of those bonus positions somebody would get as a vote on the EC. And I've actually, with your help, which I greatly appreciate because you're a very knowledgeable person, for the first time ever, we're going to get these caucus rules passed, giving more strength to that.
For folks who don't know, you're talking about the caucus of Republican county chairmen from counties that have more than 80,000 people.
Correct. Yes.
Some first-time delegates may be watching this and saying, what is this inside baseball they're talking about? What's this jargon?
There is no inside baseball. It's all right there in the rules. And it's interesting because, as you know, you and I talked about what was previously done before there was so just for anybody who is watching that doesn't know this, there are 2 positions on the executive committee that deal directly with the counties. One is the over 80,000 caucus chair and one is the under 80,000 caucus chair. So as the over 80,000 caucus chair, that encompasses, like I said, basically a chairman over the 32 biggest counties in the state. And then the rest of the counties fall in the under 80,000 caucus. So as I mentioned, being the over 80,000 chair, um, brings with it a lot of responsibility as far as representing those counties on the executive committee, but also providing resources and being a conduit to the state executive committee directly from the county chairs.
You mentioned Cobb County. I think maybe that's one of the significant, unique things you have in your race is that you're chair of a county with a population that is larger than several U.S. states. I believe it's at least larger than the state of Wyoming and possibly the state of Alaska as well. You have your land mass, I think, is 1/3 that of Delaware, but your population is comparable to Delaware. So in many ways, you have the equivalent of a state party. You look at, say, the Delaware Republican Party, the Wyoming Republican Party, and the number of delegates who come to their state conventions is 200, maybe 300. That sounds like a Cobb County convention.
Right. So we just at our caucus we had, or at our convention we had 288 people. And so yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it is tremendous. And what people talk about Cobb County as blue now. Well, Cobb County, to correct the record for anyone who's listening, started really trending blue in 2018. So it's kind of, there's been a creep. It didn't happen overnight, but I will say this to anybody. In 2020, I felt like there was an attack on Cobb County. When you look at what happened in the 2020 election, it was not just the presidential race, but it was the down ballot races. And so we were able to hang on to the school board at that point in time. But we lost everything in 2020. There's no doubt about that. Again, I didn't become the chair until April of 2021. And we've had some really good successes, but it's kind of like, a ship that's headed towards an iceberg. It doesn't just turn on a dime. It takes time, effort, energy, and resources to be able to change things. And so we have made some significant difference in where things are going. I feel good about the commission races that we have, particularly Alicia Adams' race. Also, in the mix of things, we had redistricting. And if people will remember, we didn't even get the final decision on the congressional redistricting information because, of course, that was appealed and that was a whole thing. So we've had a lot of challenges in Cobb, but we are still the second highest Republican voting county in the state of Georgia. So that's a tremendous amount of Republicans that we have in Cobb County.
I think a lot of people, again, sometimes misconstrue the influence of any individual party, county party, or even state party chairman. The secret that we don't always want to say out loud is that we're not omniscient, and there's a lot bigger forces that have much more impact over an election than a small but plucky group of volunteers in any county party. There's national trends, there's international affairs, there's war, recession, the presidential candidates themselves, huge efforts like Trump Force 47 or the Turning Point action teams. They're massive players in this, and we have an impact, but we can't flip a county, particularly a county which has been trending blue. And also, it's important to remember that each of our county parties oftentimes have been diametrically opposed to the policies of many of these counties for many, many years. And by that, I mean the local party has consistently said, no, we don't want to bring in more apartments. We don't want to raise taxes. But the Republican county commissioners in Cobb and other places ignored the wishes of the local party. And so they brought in a bunch of Democrats. Now it's a blue county. So it's not like the folks in Cobb GOP weren't trying. They weren't banging on the door saying, please don't do this. And now the county commissioners are retired to their nice country clubs, leaving the rest of us to foot the bill. But as looking forward to the final part of this, I'd like to ask you, Salleigh, as you're looking forward to the convention, what would you say is the most important thing about you and about this race that you would like people to remember as they're getting ready to cast their vote? Something that would be of practical use, not just to them, but to the state. Because at the end of the day, the people who could do the best job, in my experience, the people who can do the best job in these roles have to be begged into running for it, because you lend your time, you cost you money, But then you have to go around the whole state, huge state, asking for support, subjecting yourself to all kinds of withering, unfair criticism. You basically have to beg people for the right to serve them as their unpaid servant for 2 years, getting criticism from the peanut gallery all the time. So, number one, what should people think about that? And number two, what should they remember most about you? You got to really, the number one question is, are we a little touched in the head? Any of us who run for this job, and I say this as a former vice chair, are we a little touched in the head to volunteer our services at an unpaid job every 2 years and then get criticism from folks who aren't actually trying to do anything but criticize from the sidelines?
Well, I'm going to say this, Brent, and I know, Herschel Walker, who I love, and you know how much I was behind him in the Senate race. And before he spoke, every time he came out, he would give thanks to his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And I try and do that every day, and I fall short of that. But here's my message to people, honestly and truly, and from my heart, is that the problems that we have in this country, which is in our state, which is in our counties, in our cities, is the fact that not one of us alone can do this job to make any meaningful difference. Not one of us can turn the ship by ourselves.
So in closing, Salleigh, two questions. First off, what should people keep in mind as they're going to vote and considering their vote, and that should make them vote for you? And secondly, considering how hard you have to work for this unpaid position, as you said, that's subject to a lot of criticism and unfair attacks, that with all of that, why in the world would you run for this job?
Well, why would I run? The reason that I originally ran is because I've always been one of those people, Brent, that, people yell fire and run away from the burning building. I'm the one that runs to the burning building, and I see that our country is on fire. I see that our communities are on fire. Originally when we had all of the summer of love and all that kind of stuff, there is so much that is happening that we have been relatively in a safe haven in Georgia. But if we don't do something, it is headed this way. And that's why I will say that people need to understand that we can't do it alone. First of all, it is going to take a lot of faith in God and to ask for His divine providence and guidance in anything we do. So, there's a lot of talk on social media about who's beholden to who and who's getting paid by who and that kind of thing. For one thing, I'm accountable to God and God alone. So I want to get that out there, first of all. Second of all, it is an unpaid volunteer position. And I'm doing it because I now have a 3-year-old grandson that I never thought I would have, because my son and his wife had said, this world is just getting too crazy. We don't think we'll have kids. Well, I have one grandson who I love more than anything in the world, with another one on the way. And with the way things that are going in our country, people that are of my age and where I'm at in life, we have the opportunity to do it. And if we want to leave this place better than we found it, we better step up and we better make a difference. And that's where my heart is.
Personally, I'm much more optimistic now than I was a year or two ago about the direction of the country. I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. I recently told a group of friends that I haven't seen, in my reading of history, I haven't seen a better opportunity for people like us in 100 years. It's been a century, maybe more, in the United States, and people like us had a chance to take so much ground so quickly, as we've seen by President Trump's lightning first 100 days.
Well, that's true, Brent. But here's one thing that people need to understand is that from the time of the election, we really only have about 18 months from the time of the election to get things done, because then midterms are happening. And, I know how much with history and that kind of thing, that we have a
Public
short,
service election. Don't forget the
yes,
public service election this November. We have a double election, election this November for public service commissioner, two special elections in the fall, and then we go into primary and general election for 26.
exactly. So I told people, I went and visited the fifth district convention today. And when I spoke there, I said, 2026 has already started weeks ago. We are going to have our constitutional officers that we're going to have to elect, like you said, Public Service Commission. There is no time to waste. If we want to see President Trump's agenda implemented and the right things done, we don't have time to bicker in the party. We have time to get to work, and that's what our focus needs to be.
I said that was the last question, but Public Service Commission reminded me because really, even among active Republicans, even among people who are delegates to the state convention, I think a lot of them, maybe as many as half, don't realize that there's going to be a PSC election. The qualifying closed almost 2 weeks ago. Tim Echols has one Republican primary opponent. Commissioner Johnson is unopposed in the primary. So there'll be a Republican primary for one of those seats, and you have a Democrat primary that's going to be contested on their side. What would be some of your ideas on how we could get out the vote in this November election coming up this fall? Because you know that the turnout's going to be low. Historically, it's 5% in a municipal election, but
Right.
it's going to be 35% because the Democrats are going to try real hard. Elon and Charlie Kirk are going to come in and they're going to turn out the vote. President Trump will probably come down here. What are some of your ideas how we can boost Republican turnout? Because the Democrats are going to be gunning for this to wave as a scout for 26. They'll say, we won the PSC race, now we're going to win the governor's race.
Well, here's the thing, Brant, that is so amazing to me is that the Public Service Commission is incredibly important because our pricing for our natural gas and for our electricity and all the things that hit us really hard in the pocketbook. And one of those things is, fuel pricing. And, then you've got taxes on top of that. I think people had enough of the Biden-Harris agenda that hit their pocketbook that they've got to understand that the public service commissioners do a great service to the state of Georgia in keeping those prices low. And I think we're going to have to talk straight economics on that.
Absolutely. And this whole issue, as you know, started out because the Democrats sued demanding 5 districts instead of 5 districts all elected at large. You had to live in the district, but you were elected at large. They wanted one of the 5 to be theirs in the downtown Atlanta area. The irony of it is that if the Democrats win one or both of those seats, which are elected at large, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the Republicans turned around next year and changed it to districts because we were trying to protect Commissioner Johnson's district, which was the downtown Atlanta district, from being made into a Democrat seat. If it turns out that we lose that seat and possibly Echols too, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the Republican legislature come next spring suddenly discovers the virtues of district-based commissioners and changes back to that. But you're right. Two Democrat commissioners mean that all 3 Republicans have to be of one mind. Otherwise, things can get really, really bad in the energy and public utility industry, really bad.
Yeah, it is. And, that's one of those things. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's some of the unintended consequences that we see sometimes when the legislature is a bit short-sighted. And I've seen other instances where I take issue with what the legislature's doing or could possibly do. And that's another thing that I'm running on is a legislative agenda for the GOP. We need to develop our legislative agenda, stand by it, because when the legislature goes into session and then we see all those bills that come up that we never anticipated, we find out at the last minute, we have to be in contact with those legislators to know what they're going to be pulling out of their back pockets. We've got to have better communication on that. So that is also one of my priorities.
Pulling out of their back pocket and other such places that will be unmentioned, will go unmentioned.
That's absolutely true.
Salleigh, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Salleigh Grubbs is running for first vice chair of the Georgia Republican Party. What's your social media and website, all that good stuff where people can follow your work?
So my website is www.rallywithsalleigh, RALLY with Salleigh, SALLEIGH.com.
Which begs the question, which just goes to prove, by the way, not begs the question, goes to prove, by the way, that you never intended to pursue a career in public service or politics. Otherwise, you would have spelled your name SALLY as everyone else does.
That is exactly right. Yeah, I never planned on that. And but it is what it is. We live and we learn.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Salleigh. Great to chat with you.
Thanks, Brant.